How's it going, guys? What we're doing, and welcome to a brand new video tutorial from Udemy. Today we are giving an introduction to GraphQL. We're looking at GraphQL and with, of course, Nodejs, and alongside of that we're going to work also with React because we're going to be using the Apollo client to work with GraphQL. So GraphQL is a really interesting new standard, like actually developed by Facebook since 2012 and been used internally for a couple of years, like 5 or 6 years, and been doing really great. And lastly, it has been released into the open source. A lot of people have been so excited about it, and they actually created a lot of things, a lot of complicated systems or platforms around the awesome typed language or the type system of GraphQL. So GraphQL is simply a typed system that allows you to define your APIs and to request, fetch data from the server, and of course like do mutations or pretty much post data to the server, like have event subscriptions like sockets, and being internally connected to the server via sockets and stuff like that. So it's actually a replacement for RESTful APIs. So if you've been working with RESTful APIs in the MVC or the model view controller pattern, GraphQL is actually replaces all of that with much easier API, much better tools to be working with, and much more interesting or better developer experience actually. So the GraphQL system or typing system is pretty actually tied up. It looks like much more like a programming language with a really complicated typing system for defining all of your APIs and keeping all of your data like integrity safe, and of course all of your data is going to be tied up into your server. So this is basically what GraphQL, and here I'm going to be using this presentation. It looks pretty damn interesting and pretty great. So GraphQL's strongly typed query language enables developers to take advantage of incredible tooling for exploring GraphQL API. So this is basically what GraphQL allows you to do that. So of course, thanks to GraphQL's introspection system, developers can query a GraphQL schema for information about what queries and types it supports. So introspection unlocks some really interesting and cool features such as automatic documentation, autocomplete, and much more. So we're going to just be diving into this and seeing actually the first is a typical RESTful API architecture. And if you've been developing with RESTful APIs, you are pretty much familiar with how RESTful APIs basically works, like behind the scenes, and how you define your service RESTful API, how you keep your controls tied up if you've been using actually the MVC pattern at some point. But all of the different things in this case have like magical differences between the RESTful APIs and the GraphQL API. So here for this Edge API, we got our application, so my application, and we got the REST API gateway, which is just like a port or actually a gateway between the client and the actual server or your application server in here. So the RESTful API is going to receive client's request via HTTP, and of course if you have like HTTPS, you're going to do, for example, gets, and it's going to go into the products /123 endpoint. So you're going to query that, or you're going to send a request to this. You are actually asking for products, and specifically the 123 for ID or identification for the products, and you're going to be sending it. The RESTful API are going to parse that and everything, and it's going to at least just go ahead and send it to the database system, where the database system going to fetch that specific meaningful ID for the products, and it's going to go back with it, return it to the RESTful API, and the RESTful API going to return probably, or most of the time, is going to return a JSON object format for the client, and the client is going to use that just to do rendering stuff, UI things, and to show the actual clients. So this is basically what it is, and clearly in here returns like a JSON structured objects, and this is how RESTful APIs works. Now, if you jump like the common issues between RESTful APIs and why you should consider like moving out of RESTful APIs and exploring the new GraphQL's system. So you got overfetching. So for example, you got here like products, and you just need to specify the field name and other field description and which field that you really need like to grab. So just here you specify which field you want to grab from the object. You don't want to grab all the fields, so you just need to like specifically tell and explicitly tell them which fields you will really require to get, and here like some arrays and plenty of different really complicated things. Or you can also get into underfetching, so you just do like expand product type, expand variants, and yeah, that can lead to data integrity, like a serious issue in your data that you're going to be fetching on the client side. Now, also we're going to be facing API changes and evolution. So whenever you do a new change, you put an update on your API. So you're also gonna just go ahead into the client, you're gonna change a lot of things, and you're gonna do a critical update too for the client. And this is really awful when it comes to like working with RESTful APIs. So it's actually a downside, which is really hard for like the RESTful APIs. So whenever you do a change, whenever you do an update, you add an endpoint or you remove an endpoint, or more specifically updates the the fields and the attributes about a specific endpoint, you're gonna just go into the client and update everything else complicated or has a relationship with that endpoint specifically. So you'll get like, for example, versioning or deprecation if you've got any deprecated endpoints or attributes. You're also going to have like maintenance, so you always need to keep track of the data moving back and forth between your client and your server. Now we see the API gateways in here, which is like a pretty common example for all of the applications. Like most of the developers would create, most of the companies would feel like phase. So you got the API gateway in here, and you got the mobile API and the desktop API. So both have a separate API from each other's. So they both are gonna go ahead and like fetch the data from a specific API, which is completely dependent on the other. So if you really need to add a feature, you need to go ahead and do the first desktop API, add that feature, and make sure it works, and do some testing and all of the different things that you need to do before releasing a new feature. Then you're going to go again into the mobile API and add that particular feature for the mobile too, which is really ridiculous when it comes for huge companies and limited sized teams and budgets and plenty of things. So that's actually a downside about RESTful APIs. Now for the seeing the GraphQL approach, which is pretty great. So here for the GraphQL approach, where you got simply your application, you got the GraphQL API gateway, and you got your client. So your client is going to send this particular request, which of course is going to be sent using the HTTP protocol, but they all have the same actually endpoint. So they don't have any different endpoint or something. They all specifically have the same endpoint, which is /GraphQL most of the times. I really strongly need to change that, which comes by default. And here, using the Schema language, you need to define your query. So this is actually a query written. So you do like query my products, and you say which products ID you want to get and which fields you specifically want to get. And GraphQL is going to do all the job for you. It's going to get this product ID. It's going to just clear in here the notation for this, or how it actually looks like. It's more like a function with a parameter of ID, and you give it a value 1, 2, 3. And here you specify which particular fields that you want to get from that particular object. So the product object is going to have like plenty of fields. So if you only want to fetch the name and description, and that's all happening. So it's going to be sent to GraphQL API, and the API is going to forward to the database and just gets back with another JSON object. They always reject JSONs, but this time it has actually a standard JSON, so you don't get afraid of returning a completely different JSON than the other one. So all of those JSON have the same schema, only the data changes. So here you got the products, you got the name you asked for, and as well as the description, and as you got pretty much in here the actual data. So this data object is actually a standard thing on GraphQL. It always gets returned to you. Now, why GraphQL, or pretty much the advantages we're using GraphQL over RESTful APIs? So it has a data query language for your endpoint. So it's just like a data query language, like pretty much like MySQL. It has the SQL querying language where you write like selects from anything or something like that. So pretty much the same thing happens for GraphQL to fetching data from your server back and forth between the client and the server. And that's pretty great actually. It is developed by Facebook. It uses it internally since 2012 under Facebook, and Facebook is fully powered by GraphQL. And of course, the open source version has been published in 2015. Released in August 2015, and the specifications are released under the Facebook's GitHub page. So if you really want to just take a look on that, you can just go and do it. For the response project or structure, just to give you an example how things works or looks like, you got the query, you got my products, and here you just specify which query you want. You can just go and learn about queries and how they work on the GraphQL documentations. So you do like my products, and it's actually the name of the query. Then you define from where you want to get it, and this function is actually being defined on your server. So from the client, you specify you want to get that as a function, like you call a function, you pass it the ID parameters you expect, and you get the name and description. If it has like another object inside of it, which is like nested objects, you can also get the objects. Alongside of that, you can get the fields or specify the fields that you want to get from this specific nested objects. It's pretty great. You can have like plenty of nested or millions of nested objects inside of each other's, not specifically, but yeah, you got the point of how things works. And it's specifically going to return like the picture with the width and height, and the name, description, and everything looks like that. So every field is basically a function. So here you can just go do like products, and inside of products you're going to have all the pictures inside of that. So every field is basically simply a function. It's clear you see now got the data, and inside of it we also put something completely different or irrelevant that we don't have like defined in the schema, but we just added it as a custom attribute, and it gets added in the schema with all the pictures in that. And for the aliases, you can also add aliases, like you can add products, you can add thumb, and the pictures can have like the new name as thumb, so you can rename or do whatever you want. You see the final result gonna have thumb instead of pictures, as we've seen in the previous example. You can take a look on more how the SDL, schema definition language of GraphQL, basically works, and has all the different things in here. The possibilities of how things work for app requirements. So you have like multiple versions, for example, for app API or application mobile API and your app server, so you can easily level up the version without having any data integrity issues or any issues concerning that. Specifically using GraphQL, it's going to gets much easier to work with and much fun. So the typing system as well plays a major role in that. So you just type in like, this is actually using the schema definition language, or the SDL of GraphQL. You type in type and you give it the name, then you can give it the actual fields of that. So this is actually an integer, and the exclamation mark at the end means it is required. So the width in here actually has an integer type with a required height as well, and it has actually a string, but it's not required. So this field can be nullable. We can just put a null inside of the string value, but for both width and height, we cannot do that as well, because they are actually strongly required. And if you try to type that, you see you can have also interfaces, and you can do like a product, and you can implement interfaces if you're familiar with TypeScript on JavaScript or Java or anything like that. So it's going to be much easier for you for a typing system or an object-oriented programming looking alike schema definition language. So you got all of that. You can also define functions inside of the actual types themselves. So here, picture, and you're going to return a picture, you're going to return like a size, and a plethora of things for that. So here, the final thing I want to do, which is the main entry point, is actually the query. So the query here objects, what it's going to do, it's going to expose this both API endpoints, so they look like API endpoints. So the client later on, they can go and just call this product function, they pass in an integer of the ID, and they're going to get back a product. Or they can call the products, and you can get the whole array of products. So all of that is going to be actually exposed to the client, and all of those are types, cached in, or pretty much like hidden types. They're not going to be looking or going to be exposed to the client, though. Only this endpoint. They're going to work internally with GraphQL to execute these queries and get the result as soon as possible. So you will also be able to working with mutations and subscriptions. So for mutations, you can change the name, and you can, like, for example, imagine sending a post HTTP request to submit a form data. So this is basically the same thing for mutations. For subscriptions, you're going to be subscribing to a specific events that are going to happen on the server. So whenever this event happens, this subscription callback is going to be called. And there are a lot of things, or plenty of languages are supported by GraphQL out of the box, like for JavaScript and Nodejs development environments. There's also Scala for Sangria. There's Java, there's Python, Ruby, Elixir, Go, Lua, PHP, C++, and C#, and plenty of like low-level languages that you might require. All of those are being supported by GraphQL out of the points. Each one has its own client to work with GraphQL, and we're going to specifically focus in on Node.js or JavaScript to work on both of these. So this is actually the main GraphQL website, which is graphql.org. There's also the .com, but just like pretty controversial. So the graphql.org actually gives you the documentation, how to use GraphQL, code description, and plenty of things. So this is basically GraphQL, and as I've said before, GraphQL is actually a typing or schema, a query language for your APIs, which basically means it's available for all of languages, and we're going to specifically using it for JavaScript. And for JavaScript, there's actually a client that offers that out of the box, which is the best client that you might want to find in JavaScript, and specifically made for React, but it works with all things like GraphQL, Vue, or it works with Angular as well. So if you really need to do that, but we're going to specifically focus on React, on Node.js, and specifically for that, I'm going to be using Express. So for GraphQL, we need to set up on our server. So for the server, we're going to have like this type system, all of the data, and then have like resolvers, which is the equivalent for controllers in our MVC application. And the other side, on the client side, we're also going to be able to have like a client that can send requests to or queries to the actual server and grab the data, and in a formal or a normal form, I'm going to give this data and just put it in our server to for rendering. So this is basically what we're going to be doing. And for the Apollo in here, we got Apollo as ApolloGraphQL.com. So you're just going to head there, gonna have like a platform, and it has plenty of things actually to be working with. Platform is for bigger scales, companies or teams that want to get higher. But to start up easy, we're just going to do the documentations. So for the Apollo documentations, we're going to be looking at, there's just two versions. There's actually the clients. When you're implementing the clients, there's React, Angular, Vue.js, and native iOS or Android for React Native. And as well for the Scala.js, it's also available. And of course, there's the Apollo server, which is available for different like Node.js frameworks that you'll be working with. So there's actually Apollo server and GraphQL tools and GraphQL subscriptions. We're going to be looking at specifically the Apollo server. So looking how to implement Apollo with all of different things. And here actually how it works for the client and the server. So they both implement Apollo. So for example, Android, iOS, and web, they both send the queries in here, and they're going to just like among Apollo, we're going to send it to microservices, databases, and RESTful APIs. So that's going to do getting started and how you can set up working with Apollo specifically, like the Apollo server and the GraphQL, and how you can install dependencies. And actually it depends on that. We're also going to be using actually more specifically a version of Apollo and Express. So we can be just going to do like search in here, and how you can, if you're already existing HTTP Express server, you can send or look for other HTTP servers and how you can work them. And here it gives you actually like an interesting example on how you can go ahead and work with Apollo and GraphQL on the actual server. So let's just jump into our application in here. I already got some code actually set up in here for the server. So I'm just going to do zoom in, and I'm going to just do view, zoom in here, just to zoom in quite a little bit for you to see clearly. And what we say, we first need to install, of course, Express or our server. If you already got like an already existing Express Node.js server, you can also integrate GraphQL very easily using the Apollo. And of course, you need just do install GraphQL. So just do npm install GraphQL and do install Apollo server-express. And most of the times you want to install also cars for just enabling cross-sites for your requests and allow them, because most of the times it's going to give you an issue for that, because you're going to be just send a request from a different host name or a different domain name, and that's going to cause an issue. So just add that and install different things. You also might want to add or install Node Monitor as a development, but this is basically all we need to do, and make sure to add the save. So simple enough. After installing all the different things, we're going to be setting up using the Apollo, GraphQL, and the Express version specifically. So this package also do that specifically on the actual server. So we've got a couple of files I've already created in here. This is actually the main entry point, which is the server.javascript. We've got resolvers, which works as controllers, and we got the constant here, just constant data to work with, and we got the actual schema definition language for defining our GraphQL schema and just putting it inside a file. So here we're going to start off by putting actual server, and most of the things for creating an Express server, which is pretty simple to do that. So I'm going to just do require. I'm going to do require Express, and I'm just going to do Apollo. I'm going to try to set up a really simple application using Apollo for Express and Node.js for bringing up the server, and using create react app / Apollo React client for putting up the front end and linking it together using GraphQL. So here we're going to just also grab GraphQL, and this actually going to require the Apollo GraphQL Express server. I'm going to do const ports, business sense 4000 for that. We're gonna do resolvers, but we don't have that anymore, and we still don't have that yet. So we're gonna have actually const server, and for the actual server to be created, we need to do new Apollo server, and here we need to fit in with our options. We need to first give it the type definitions, and we give it our resolvers. We're gonna talk about that in a second. So we need to just go ahead and define a schema for our objects. And for defining actually a schema for objects, you need to, if you're not familiar with like GraphQL schema stuff, you can take a look at how the schema looks like, and you can just go into for learning pretty much GraphQL, you can just take in the SDL and or pretty much just type in schema and types. It's just gonna give you plenty of examples and explain how schema works, how to put the type system, what different attributes in here, as a character, as a name, a string, ints, or even an ID has of that. So it's plenty of different things are available on the actual schema definition language. So we're gonna simply do in here, I'm gonna first do like grab GraphQL using require Apollo Express server. I'm gonna do module.export, and I'm gonna export in the main GraphQL server. So make sure to wrap it using this string template literal parser, which is just a wrapper, and we need to use the special like quotes in here. They're not normal quotes or something, so you need to use string literals quotes in order to put that and make it working. So here you need to define all of your schema. So first I'm gonna just type in first type, which is the author, and I'm gonna be creating like simple application for having or getting books from a store, and you can buy books and stuff, but it's gonna be just super simple, just fetching books from the server and showing that. So it's actually like more like a bookstore or an online bookstore. So we're gonna have an author in here. Author is simply just gonna have a name, and we're gonna have a string for this. I'm just gonna put an exclamation mark to make it actually required. We're gonna also have a book type, and for the dev book, we're gonna have like a name for a string. Gonna have exclamation mark, gonna have author. It doesn't need any separation between that, just need to return to the line, and that means you're gonna put a new field. So you can even put them all in the same line, that doesn't really matter. So you don't need to put it like a comma in here, or like a semicolon or anything. And you're also gonna be needing of pages, and it's gonna be an integer, of course, required. And the last most important thing you need to define as a type, which is the query type. And this query type is actually the main entry point for your GraphQL API. So whatever you put in here are going to be actually the endpoint for your application. So this is going to be executed, and like the client is going to be able to send queries to that specific endpoint you're going to be staying in here. For example, you can put like hello, and hello is going to simply just going to return a string. So for example, you're going to be just returning hello, and in all the case we can also be putting books or stuff, or just going to be listing for now using hello. We're just going to be returning a string in that case. So we're going to control S, we're going to go back in here. I'm going to put the type definitions. So I'm going to do const type defs, and I'm just going to require and go to the schema to grab all the type definitions. So just typing in here type definitions. The other most important thing are resolvers, and resolvers is actually a map, or pretty much an object that allows you to map your endpoint. So for example, you say whenever a user actually queries the hello endpoint that we've specified in our query object, which is, as I've said before, the main entry point for our GraphQL API. So whenever it queries the hello, the hello should pretty much return a string. So we need actually a function that runs whenever the user sends a request to the hello endpoint in here, and whenever the user sends that, this function is going to run, and it's going to pass in parameters if it has any. If it doesn't, it's going to run, and of course it has to return a string that's going to fulfill this convention in here, or this requirement on the hello field. So for that, we're going to be specifying all of different functions that are going to resolve all the endpoints inside of the resolvers.javascript, and that's why they are named resolvers, because it resolves data to a specific attribute or specific fields or endpoints for our GraphQL API. So for that, what we're going to be putting first, we're going to just do module.export, and this basically going to export like the main query objects, and make sure to put the main query objects in here as an object, as the parent objects, and inside of it you're gonna have all of the resolvers that you want. So make sure to put the same name as your schema's endpoint in here. So you put hello, and of course you're gonna be just putting hello in here, and it's gonna be running as a function, as I've said. So you need to put the function notation for it, and you can do whatever manipulation in here, like manipulation or anything like that in here. And of course, I don't know if I misspelled manipulation. I don't really need to know how to put manipulations or something, but you simply need to make sure to return a string like hello word from the other side or something. I don't know, you can do whatever in here, and it's going to be returning, it's going to be running, and make sure to put that resolver inside of that as well. So I'm going to do resolvers, and of course we are going to be doing resolvers. So make sure to put resolvers as well in there. So that's basically how you set up a server, how you put up resolvers and stuff. And most importantly, what we simply need to put as the final for the server is actually applying it as a middleware. And as I said before, I'm just gonna go ahead and apply the course middleware to allow course requests for application. This is not required if you want to put it on production, because make sure to remove that on production. It's a really bad approach. Just use this on development, and specifically when running it on localhost. So just do course and app.use course, and of course I haven't created the application yet, so I'm just going to create and initialize the application using Express. And for the application, what we need to make sure is actually apply the middleware to application. So I'm going to do just server apply middleware, and I'm going to be passing in the actual application reference. It's going to be passed in as an object, and there you go, simple enough. Now use the application, I'm going to be listening to that, and yeah, I don't really need to waste time for this, putting all of different codes in here. So I'm going to return console log. I'm just going to show the server GraphQL path, and then that's simply what it is. And for the back.json, you need to go ahead, create a new start script, and make sure to put nodemon, and your first entry point is actually the server.js, so make sure to run it first using the node monitor package. And that's basically it. So we can just go in and do npm run start to start our GraphQL and / express server. Now it's clear to see server started at localhost 4000 / GraphQL, and this is actually the main, or by default the endpoint of our GraphQL, which is whatever the domain name of your website or your server, and / GraphQL. You can change that, of course, it's fully customizable, but for now we can just gonna simply access that, of course. And at some point I totally forgot about putting the cars in here, so make sure to execute as a function, otherwise it's gonna give you an issue. So just refresh that, and there you go, you got playground, and it looks actually pretty stunning. So GraphQL books name author, I've already put this actually query, but we don't really need this query, so we can go and put a new query. And for querying from the client, you always need to put actually a query as an object. So that's basically what you always need to make sure. This is actually the entry point, and you have to specify that more specifically as query, and you need to go to like whatever we got in here for our schema. For we got from the query, we can just go and do an endpoint for hello. You can take more look on that, so if you don't have a look on the schema file or something, you can go from the documentation tab in here. You can take a look at the queries and which queries are available. It's clear to see only the hello is available because it's being put inside of the main entry point, which is the query type or the query object. So it returns a string, of course. You can take a look on the full schema from this tab, and it gives you the full schema. You can even download it, which is pretty great and pretty interesting. So yeah, that's a pretty great job of using Apollo as a client instead of using like standard GraphQL without this pretty schema or syntactical sugar and stuff that makes it much easier for you to work with GraphQL. So for the documentation here, it returns actually hello, and it simply returns a string. So we can just go and do query that. So just put in hello in here, and that's simple, right? Because we don't have an object, just have a primitive type as a string. So we can just go and do, and it's clear to see we got data, and it returns hello as a field, puts hello word from the other side. Pretty great, pretty damn cool. Now that's all the different things in here. What we now need to do is actually put some books to be working with on the server actually. So I'm just going to go to the const, and I already set up some actually just simple books, like an array of objects. So we got like Friends Forever with an author name and number of pages. So different books in here. So just put in the const that you will be working with. And here for the actual schema, we're going to be adding a couple of things for actually a schema. So the first thing we're going to be adding actually books, which is a function or an endpoint that allows you to get an array of all the available books. And the second thing you want to do is actually getting a specific book by name. So it's actually a function. You need to put it a parameter. You give it a parameter name, which is a string, and you just make sure to put it as a required. And what it returns is basically going to be returning a single book. And of course, we're not going to be putting an exclamation mark because most of the times if you put the name wrong or something, you're going to return null, and that's actually completely acceptable because we haven't included the exclamation mark. Otherwise, if you put it in that, we must return an object for a book, a valid object, otherwise it's just going to give us or crash the server, and GraphQL are going to give us an error. So to allow nullable values, you need to just go and return that. For this specific case, it is super important to allow nullable values. So just put in that. Now we go to the resolvers and implement both of these endpoints. So go inside of resolvers, just put it in here. I'm gonna have like books, and of course you're gonna run as a function, and you're gonna have a single book, and of course it's gonna be running as a single function. So for books, what we're simply gonna be putting, let me just gonna do const books, and we're gonna be requiring it from const. So that's actually all the books that we've got in here. And for the books, we're simply just going to be returning all the books. Simple enough. Now for the book, Apollo or pretty much GraphQL allows you or gives you some parameters on the function that the query is going to be received. The first argument is actually going to be a root argument. Throughout this root argument, you're going to get all the nested return types, all the nested queries from the previous nested. So you've got, for example, this book inside of the books in here, it's actually as a nested child is going to get the root result from the top parent on this root object. You're going to second get arguments, which are pretty much arguments passed to the query at runtime. So what I mean by at runtime, so whenever you just say hello in here, for example, and I give it actually an ID of 1, this ID of 1 is going to be available as an object on the arguments. The second thing, I have actually a context, which is a context parameter that's going to be shared instance between all the queries, or all the resolvers going to have this context as a shared one. So for example, if you really need to share some data back and forth between a query and another, or pretty much between a resolver and another, you're going to just put it inside of this object, and it's going to be available on all of them, and it's going to have one single instance. So that's basically what it does have in here, and that's basically what you need as a simple usage. There are other advanced like attributes or pretty much parameters that we don't really need to cover up for now, but yeah, it's pretty great for it. Now what we can do in here, we can just go and do destructs like the arguments, and we are going to specifically be needing from the args, we're going to be needing name, because we have specified that we're going to be putting name in the schema, and we have to put or to get the same thing in here as a key of name. To find a couple of things for the book in here, we can just go and check if it's not name, or if name is actually just empty. What we can do, just going to simply return null, and we have the right to return null in this case. And otherwise we can just do like found book, and we can do a search. So actually you have books, we can use the find method, a book, and of course if book.name equals name, we can just going to return, and we get the found book. Otherwise we're just going to be returning null. So if it's not found book, we're going to just return null. Otherwise we're going to be returning the found book. Simple enough. If you have like a database or something, you need to call your database system and do requests and stuff. Of course you can be working with also promises are fully supported on GraphQL and Apollo. So you're just going to return a promise in here. The promise is going to be resolved on the client without any issues, without overcomplicating it or anything. It's pretty simple and straight to the point. Now we can save that, and we can just go and do a query for both. I already got this query. So you got books in here to get that, and you can put whatever fields that you want to get from that. So you can do like name, author, and num pages. If you remove one, it's going to be removed on the results. So yeah, actually the choice is yours, and you can put these functions. You got my book. You can put for example any argument in here. You can just completely remove that. You put the book function, you give it a name, and you give it actually a storm of word of sorts, and of course you get the name and the number of pages only. We're not going to be getting the author, so if we just submit that, we're going to get books first, and we're going to get the second query with as a book, the book that we've requested with num pages and the name that we have completely requested. And for the first one, we're going to get an array of all the different books that you've requested. If you add in here like an author, it's going to be simply adding on the request or pretty much on the response, and George R.R. Martin has been, the author of this particular book, which is a Game of Thrones book, by the way. Now, as well as that, I got also a React application. I've already set up a couple of things with this application, which is a create React app version created using the create React app command line interface. So I'm going to be setting up and trying to query this particular part of the GraphQL. So you're going to go to GraphQL React, and I got this simple application working in here. So first things first, we're going to be starting by putting a couple of things actually. So first, you need to install the Apollo client and the GraphQL client, of course. So just to make sure to install Apollo Boost, GraphQL, and the React Apollo. And of course, optionally, you need to install style components if you want to use style components in this case. So I'm just going to do clear npm. So make sure to install Apollo Boost and GraphQL. And of course you need to install React script. And lastly, so actually an optional dependency, you can also be installing a style component to put CSS in JavaScript, and make sure to use the save command to save it internally. So that's basically all the actual requirements or dependencies that you need to install before running that. And of course, beside of all that, you need to also set up your React application using whatever CLI or boilerplate you choose of your own. So I already got an application fully working in here. So first things first, what we need to do first is actually initialize the application and add the wrapper, or add it with compatible to work with Apollo. So for that case, what we can do is actually just do import Apollo client. I'm going to be also importing GraphQL from Apollo Boost. And pretty much the second thing that I'm going to be importing is actually some components from Apollo React. So I'm going to do Apollo provider and the query. So both going to be required from React Apollo. So I'm going to be both using it. I'm also going to be requiring styles from style components. And yeah, that's basically all we need for this case. Now we here first to initialize the client and give it actually the URI of our endpoint of our server to connect the client to the server. And for that case, we're going to do client, and we have to use the actual Apollo client, or just to create an instance of it. So I'm going to do new Apollo client, and here for the configuration we need to put the URI. And for the URI, we can just gonna put the actual link with our server. So make sure to put your link in here, so as whatever domain name, and make sure to add the endpoint of GraphQL, otherwise it won't work. So that's a really crucial part to consider doing before doing anything other than that. So simple enough. This is basically all you need to do. And for Apollo, it basically works with the React Context API. So you must provide it with, or wrap it using the provider, the Apollo provider more specifically. So we can just include in here Apollo provider. And we can just copy both that. We can just do client. And simply for the client, what we can do is actually just feed it with a client, and all of the things we can then use Apollo client inside of that, which is like actually Apollo customer, to get the query or get the client instance from here and basically work with it. So simple enough. This is simply all we need to do in that particular case. Now at some point we got some issues. So we got import styled. Styled has already been declared. Yeah, for sure. I'm okay. I just imported it twice. Never mind. So we're also going to be getting to components, and inside of books, so we're going to create a folder components. We're going to create books.jsx just for using React or XML, and we're going to be putting the books component in this case to work specifically with that. So we're just going to do import React. Yeah, I already got the code in here, so just to make it much faster, we're not going to be learning CSS or something in this particular video tutorial. So I'm going to copy paste all the CSS in JS or style components that I've created, which is just basically putting CSS in JavaScript. If you're new to this or not familiar, or have the intuition to learn that, you can just go to the channel, just Hypnos, and you can find a brand new video tutorial explaining how to use style component or CSS in JS with React component, which is pretty great. So you can just go and check it out right now. I already set up all of that. We got React, we got styled, and I've already set up some components which some custom styles are going to be using, like books container, a single book, book title, author name, and num pages. And here we're going to be just putting the main React component. So we're going to export function, which is going to be putting a functional component which is going to represent all the books. We're going to have props. And from props, we're going to be grabbing an array of books, which is going to be fetching from the endpoint. So whenever we fetch, we query it from the GraphQL server that we've created. We're going to get all the books, and we're going to be passing it as a props to the books components right over here. So that's basically the architecture of our application and how it works. We're going to be returning first. So it's going to be looking like books container. And here we're going to be looping through our books. I'm going to use the map method, and of course it's going to be an array. So we're going to get first book. We're going to get the index of that book from 0 to whatever length of the book array or the books array. I'm going to be returning here again a single book. So a single book, going to first take a key, and the key in here just to make React identify it and has actually side effects on the rendering. So you need to provide that, which is uniquely identified to a specific element in that array. So I'm just going to be putting in here EDX for identifying that. Okay. So inside of here, I'm going to just have book title. Alright. And I'm going to have book.name. Okay. We're going to have also author name. So we're gonna have book dot author. Okay. And lastly but not least, I'm gonna have got num pages and book dot num pages. There you go. Simple enough. We provided all of that, and should be working elegantly without any issues. So going back into the app.javascript in here, where we need to render the book, but before rendering any books in here, we need to query our server, and that's where the query component plays its major part. So this component actually allows you to give it a query, which is going to be defined on the GraphQL schema language or schema query language, and of course it's going to be defined right over there, and it's going to be sent to, or query with it to, the actual GraphQL API. So that's basically what we're going to be working on. So here we're going to be using a query component, and more specifically, the query component actually uses the props render API of React. So here it feeds you with the props that's going to get from the query. So it's pretty much going to be using here get props from it, and of course whenever we get a props, we can render whatever we need in here. But first it takes actually a query. So for the query to be taken, we need to provide a couple of things actually. So it's going to try to here to put up all our queries up here. I'm just going to do, okay, I'm going to put my query in here. So I'm going to create a const. I'm going to get name a query get books, which gets you all the books. You need to use GraphQL string line or pretty much string literals parser. You put the main entry point as a query. You can name this or you can just ignore it, but I'm gonna just name it get books. And here we're gonna just put our query as books. So it's gonna get all the books. It's gonna first get the name. It can get also the author, and simply it can get the number of pages. So simple enough. We can just gonna save that. We don't need any commas in here. I always forgot about putting commas right over here. Here for the query, I'm gonna be putting get books query. You can put also variables. So here for the variables, if you are expecting any variables in this side of query, those variables are going to be passed to this query, and throughout this query is going to be passed to the GraphQL API. So we don't have any of that. We're going to get all the books, simple enough. And here we're going to be rendering all the books as well. But before rendering all the books, the props is going to have like a couple of options. It has like an error options, loading options, and finally the data options. If everything goes successfully okay, you're going to get the data objects with the requested data, of course, from the GraphQL API server. So you can, for example, do just console.log, and you can get the props, of course. And of course you can log the props and take a look at how the props are structured. But for simple enough, we're going to be putting first getting the error from it. We're going to get the loading, and we're going to get the data using ES6 destructuring syntax. And if there are any errors, what we can do is simply just return an error. So I'm going to do like div. Okay, I can't type the div. So error, and we can give it the actual error dot message, I think. Yeah, so you can access the message on it. There's actually predefined things. You can take a look on the documentation. It also has a loading. So a loading state, what it means, if there are a loading state, you can just wait for it to finish, and that's it. So just like loading. And otherwise, if loading is finished and there are errors, we also need to make sure to check for the data. So if we have an invalid data.books, so if not data.books, we also need to be first checking if not data and not, or pretty much, yeah, so if not data and not data.books, what we can simply just do return in here, we can just return an error, no books found. And lastly, what we can do, just return books. Of course, the components that we're going to render, and we can simply just do books, feed in the props that we are expecting. Remember, we already have been, we don't have books in here. So I'm just going to do import books. Yeah, that's completely controversial, but still does the job. So components and books to get the books components from here. So if we click on it, we're going to get prompts. We're going to be passing the books components prompts. So the prompts just going to be simply data books, and simple enough. So this data.books, if you named it completely different in here, for example, if you put an alias for it, for example, like my books or something, you also going to be just referencing that because the response is going to have that name, like my books, as an attribute name instead of the books as an attribute name. So you're going to be changing this in here, and of course changing this here to make it work. So otherwise it won't perfectly work, whatever. So here we're just going to save, and that's how the query thing works, and that's how you can pretty much, using the query components, you can query it, you can get the prompts, and of course you can render a couple of things from that. And similarly we get, so bool is not defined. Alright, where is that? Alright, so yeah, I mistyped something. It's book. Alright, great. We're just going to save that again. And here, so this is basically all of application. Just going to query it, and using the query, just like send the query, we use the props render API, we get the props from the server. If we got any errors or stuff, we need to like ensure to render errors instead of the data, and we also make sure that the data is actually completely valid before rendering it. Otherwise, and lastly, thing that you need to do is just like feed it to the books render and return that particular component to render all the books. So if we take a back look on that, we got our website and we got all the books. So we got store books, we got Friends Forever from Daniel Steele, Rich Dad Poor Dad, The Old Man and the Sea, and A Storm of Swords from George R.R. Martin. And all of those are being fetched from the actual GraphQL API that we have created. If we take a look on GraphQL server, take a look along the schema. This is actually the schema that we have defined. You can also go in and query a specific book by name. And if you take a look on the const, all of the books that are here are pretty much being fetched on the client side using GraphQL and React, and of course the cool, awesome tool Apollo for doing all of the greater things. So yeah, so that's pretty much it for you guys. How to use GraphQL with Apollo and as well alongside React to render a couple of things, to create an API server on Nodejs Express, and to learn GraphQL pretty much in one single video very quickly. We haven't covered all of different things, but we've created a simple React application that gets fetching data from an API and setting up, of course, a server API of GraphQL alongside Express, and all of the different things and how they should be working. So thank you guys for watching. I really hope you guys have enjoyed the video tutorial as always. So without further ado, without further say, make sure to put out comments, like if you really liked this type of videos, if you really want for me to create a new video tutorials about GraphQL or new typing systems, or create like different awesome video tutorials in here, like one single video to explain all the different things, topics concerning a specific thing or a specific tool. So yeah, so thank you guys for watching. As I said again, I really hope you guys have enjoyed this video tutorials. I see you all guys hopefully in the next one. Adios.